Good evening, everybody. Just in response to, I think it was Point HQ's asking us to recommend three of our most favourite or inspirational or just interesting books, and I've got three here which occurred to me. The first one is Masada. I don't know, some of you might remember the mini-series about 20 plus years ago, or 20 or possibly even 25 years ago now, with Peter O'Toole as the Roman general. I think it was Flavius. What we had here was the Jewish rebellion of, I think it was 72 AD. Flavius Silva, the Roman governor, went to destroy the Jewish stronghold of Masada, which was very well situated. Actually, it was a massive rock with not many ways of attack. Really, they had water, I believe, caverns full of water, and they were able to survive pretty much indefinitely. The Jewish rebels, and the Roman legion, as was their way, went with all their engineers, and they were able to basically build a causeway, which is still there to this day, 2,000 years later, and launch an attack on the settlement eventually, after much making of ramparts. And the Jewish settlers, knowing what was in store for them, decided to commit suicide. This is actually a very interesting book. There's another view there of the fortress. As I say, the evidence of the Roman camps which surrounded the fortress are still there. And when this book dates from, the early 60s, Professor Yigael Yadin, he took a team of archaeologists there, and they did an excavation on the site, and they found evidence of the Jewish rebels having drawn lots to see who would kill each other in the final battle, when it was all over, when the Romans had gained access to the fortress. And as I say, it was a mini series of. Sorry to keep referring to the mini series, but it was rather well done, and it gives you a very vivid picture of what went on at the time. Probably easier to take in than most books. This is sort of more aimed towards the, I suppose, the archaeological, easy for me to say, enthusiast. But nevertheless, it's quite a heroic story. There is an Osprey campaign book on the Jewish rebellion, which details some of the or somewhat of Masada and the other campaigns leading up to it. I think it was Josephus, the Jewish historian, who wrote of the siege, and he'd obviously gone over to the Romans, and so again, you can't necessarily trust everything that's written there, but it was certainly an epic battle. I mean, it's not as widely known as it should be, I suppose, outside of Israel, but it certainly was one of the epic tests of the Roman army. And he has some of the scraps of pottery with Hebrew lettering on, which were, as I say, believed to be the original scraps of pottery, in which they were all put into a pot, and whoever pulled out one of the scraps of pottery killed whoever was pulled out next. This is the actual leader of the of the Jewish rebels, with his name written on it. And when the Romans got up into the fortress, there was absolutely no one alive. They'd all slain each other, and as I say, it was done by the drawing of lots. This book, as I say, dates from the 1960s, and it's a place I'd definitely like to visit. I mean, it's a bit of a trek apparently when you get out to the region, but it's incredible to think that there's Roman camps, and the causeway that you see that the Romans built in order for them to attack the fortress, it is still there. I mean, that we're talking about a campaign of some 6 months or more in order to finally take the fortress, and I'm pretty sure that the Jewish rebels had adequate water and supplies there. It wasn't a matter of running out of anything. It was just that the Romans were just so tenacious that they wouldn't give up, and eventually the place fell. But yeah, your first port of call is probably the Osprey campaign book, as I say, Jewish Rebellion, AD 73. The other book that I've got is a current interest of mine, Jacobite Rebellions, the first battle in which the Jacobite, the Highlanders, launched an attack on fairly untrained, it has to be said, government troops. I mean, most of the troops were on the continent, fighting in a campaign over there. I can't recall which particular one, but I think with Cumberland they were fighting in those sort of battles against the French, and the army as it was fairly scattered in Scotland, and they had an awful lot of trouble. I mean, you see here the cover; it shows the British or government troops starting to melt away. Cope was able to survive the battle, and I don't think he was too harshly treated. It was fairly generally recognised that he'd been left with a very difficult task. He had to try to cover several roads into the Highlands, and I mean, he made the right choice. He got to the right place, but he was unable to deal with the Highland charge, which was in this case downhill on, as I say, untrained troops of fairly low morale. A lot of them fairly recently recruited just for this particular campaign. There's a picture there on the battlefield of Bankton House, which has been restored very well. I mean, I was up in Scotland about 25 years ago, been subsequently many times, but Bankton House then was a hollow shell. I mean, it was as you see it there, but with all the windows gone, the roof was gone. I walked up to that door and I had a photograph taken there, and the house inside had all fallen in on itself. So presumably National Trust of Scotland have done a fairly great job there. But yes, it was the first battle in which the Highlanders were able to fight in the manner which was most successful to them, and on ground which was most successful to them. Very far removed from their eventual battle at Culloden. You see there basically the Highland charge going ahead, and that was hard for fairly untrained troops to resist. But on another day, as I say, at Culloden, on a very flat battlefield, it was a different story altogether. My third book is actually because Ralph Astley, he had a book on the archaeology of the Battle of the Little Bighorn, and it struck me that I had a very similar book, but written from the point of view of essentially forensic pathologists, in particular the people who are given a skull, usually by the police, and asked to reconstruct the facial details in order to recreate what they would have looked like. And it's been proven countless times from murder victims who was subsequently identified that that their actual sorry, you got an earlier trooper of the 7th Cavalry there, rather badly messed up by the Indians, shot full of arrows, and another one there of a chap just recently scalped. So hopefully not too much of a close-up. It's rather graphic, but they've been able to name one or two of the soldiers who've been found on the battlefield. This is, as Ralph says, subsequent to the sort of bushfire that stripped off the vegetation from the little Bighorn battlefield, and you've got a human vertebrae there transfixed by an arrowhead, and they were able to recreate certain facial characteristics and identify individuals from the 7th Cavalry. One in particular there, found in 1877, and they were able to recreate a cavalryman of the 7th. They also found numerous teeth, and again were able to generate a copy from someone's skull. But we have here various pictures of 7th Cavalrymen who've been sadly hit very hard in the side of the head with tomahawks and the like. The forensics has been able to recreate the type of weapon that would have caused these things. Again, I think one of the first to be identified was Mitch Boyer, the French-Canadian Indian, one of Custer's scouts, whose facial characteristics made him a little easier than the rest to identify. But they've got a couple more names, and this book is particularly good. I mean, it goes into very, very graphic detail. Not that that's good, but it goes into intense detail about each soldier discovered, whose bones were discovered on the battlefield, the injuries they sustained, and the exact whereabouts on the battlefield. And like Ralph was mentioning, they were able to trace one individual soldier being stalked by 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 Indians, and the Indians were so overwhelming in numbers, and indeed their weapons were in many cases superior. They were able to pick off the soldiers fairly leisurely, and this book, as I say, it's got an awful lot of names and exactly how they died, and there's pictures of a gunshot wound in the left-hand wrist of a soldier. They found another soldier's skeletal bony hand with the engagement ring that he had on still in place, and they really were able to piece it together quite in exceptional detail, probably more than any other 19th century battle, and many 20th century ones for that matter. And it's a very interesting book. I mean, it's quite, as I say, it's quite graphic, and it's quite scientific in many places. It's full of charts and graphs and what have you, but they all are quite interesting. And I think it's an American publication. I don't know if it was ever officially available over here, but that concludes my 3 books. And I could have gone on really. There's many here that do strike me as you know, worthy of note. I've got a couple of shelves, and in the garage I've got a great many more tucked away. A lot about wargaming. You know, I'm not played a wargame, and yet I am very interested in the literature surrounding wargaming, and I've got most of the early books upon the subject, and I've got my fair share, as we all have, of Osprey books. But you know, I'll maybe do some more on a future occasion. But those are three I thought were fairly you know, curious and worth a look at. And so thanks again for originating the idea, and hopefully you're all well, and I shall be speaking to you in another video soon. Take care, lads. Bye.